The slab of black granite was not a door to be opened, it was a scar on the mountain, a seal designed to keep a contagion locked in the dark. The forest was too quiet here, the air smelling of wet stone and a patience that spanned centuries. Marlowe stood at the threshold, the star metal key heavy and parasitic in her palm, leaching the warmth from her blood.
She told herself she was the savior, the one woman with a heart pure enough to free him.
She didn't realize she was just the only one foolish enough to bring the monster the one thing he couldn't reach, the lock. Her boots sank into the moss that carpeted the path, silencing her approach. The forest had swallowed all sound but the frantic beat of her own heart, a drum against her ribs. Above, the canopy of ancient oaks choked the last of the evening light, leaving the world in shades of bruised purple and gray. This was the final test. The culmination of months of whispered conversations in shadowed galleries, of shared books bound in human skin, of a love so profound it felt like a remaking of her very soul. Calder, her Calder, was trapped in this forgotten place, a victim of lesser men's jealousy. She was his key. His salvation. The thought sent a thrill through her, sharp and bright, chasing away the gnawing chill that had settled deep in her bones. The path ended abruptly at a wall of sheer, black rock, slick with moisture. Set into it was a door. It wasn't wood, but a single, massive slab of granite, held by hinges of green-black bronze. There was no handle, only a keyhole, a dark mouth waiting to speak. The key felt impossibly heavy as she lifted it. Her fingers, numb with cold and anticipation, fumbled for a moment. She steadied herself with a hand against the weeping stone of the doorframe. The rock was colder than ice, a deep, primal cold that seemed to suck the warmth right out of her blood. She focused on his face, the image she held in her mind like a holy icon, his dark eyes, the silver streaks at his temples, the curve of his mouth that held both infinite sadness and the promise of ecstasy.
For him. All for him.
She pushed the key into the lock. It slid in with a grating sound, stone on metal, that set her teeth on edge. It didn't turn. Of course not. It wouldn't be that simple. She remembered his instructions, the soft murmur against her ear.
It is a lock of the mind as much as the hand. Do not force it. Persuade it. Let it feel your intent.
Marlowe closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the cold granite. She emptied her mind of fear, of the rustling sounds in the woods behind her, of the sheer, oppressive loneliness of the place. She filled it with Calder. With the ache of her longing for him, the fierce, burning certainty of her devotion. She turned the key again, not with her wrist, but with the full weight of her belief. A low groan echoed from deep within the stone, and then a series of clicks, loud as breaking bones, cascaded from the mechanism. 1, 2, 3. A puff of stale, ancient air washed over her face, carrying a scent that stopped her breath. It wasn't the damp rot of a tomb. It was the rich, heady perfume of dried roses and frankincense, a holy, welcoming scent. The granite door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a flight of stairs descending into perfect, velvet blackness. Her lantern cast a nervous, golden puddle of light ahead of her. The stone steps were worn smooth in the center, a channel carved by centuries of feet. The air grew warmer as she descended, the scent of roses intensifying, masking the underlying mineral tang of the earth. The walls were not rough-hewn stone but polished obsidian, reflecting her flickering light in 1,000 fractured pieces, making it feel as if a dozen other Marlowes walked with her, just out of sync. She could hear the slow, rhythmic drip of water somewhere in the darkness ahead, a sound like a faltering clock. The silence between each drop was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered thought. Her own breathing seemed a profane intrusion. She ran a hand along the wall. It was smooth and cool, not slimy. Clean. This wasn't a dungeon. It was a sanctuary. Calder's words echoed in her memory. They call it a crypt, a prison. But my ancestors built it as a place of reflection, a vessel for waiting. The steps leveled out into a narrow passage. Her lantern light caught something etched into the wall to her right, letters carved with a desperate, unsteady hand, so different from the perfect smoothness of the surrounding stone. She leaned closer, tracing the sharp grooves with her fingertips. The stone was gritty here, chipped and raw. Emmett Thorne. The name meant nothing to her. Below it, 2 lines. Do not listen. The words were a physical blow, a spike of ice in her gut. She pulled her hand back as if burned. Calder had warned her. The one who locked me in here, Emmett Thorne, was a man consumed by fear. He inscribed his cowardice into the very walls, desperate to poison any who might come after. She took a deep, steadying breath, the scent of incense calming the frantic pulse in her throat. It was a trick. A final, pathetic ward from a long-dead jailer. Pity, she thought. That's what Calder had asked her to feel for him. Pity for a man who could not understand a love like theirs. She held the lantern higher, turning her back on the warning, and moved forward. The second line of the inscription was swallowed by the shadow she cast. Do not pity. The passage opened into a vast, circular chamber. The air here was still and warm, the perfume of roses almost overwhelming. The source of the scent was everywhere and nowhere. There were no flowers, no smoldering braziers, just the same polished obsidian walls. But the room was not empty. Her light slid across the floor, catching on dark shapes. Skeletons. Dozens of them, arranged in a silent circle around the chamber's edge. They were not scattered or broken, but seated, propped against the wall as if in quiet contemplation. And they were chained. Thick, rusting chains snaked from iron rings in the wall, looped around ribcages and pelvic bones, shackling them in place. This was his family, she realized. The ancestors Calder had spoken of, waiting with him. A strange, reverent awe filled her. It was a vigil. She moved deeper into the room, her light playing over the silent congregation. One skeleton sat apart from the others, closer to the center of the chamber, chained to a great iron pillar. This one was different. The clothes were not ancient rags but the tattered remains of a wool coat and denim trousers. Her light traveled down a skeletal arm, past the manacle on its wrist, and stopped. A knot of ice formed in Marlowe's stomach. On the bone, hanging loosely, was a watch. A man's watch, with a stainless steel band and a broad, dark face. The glass was cracked. She knelt, her own hand trembling as she brought the lantern closer. The hands were frozen. Not on some ancient time, but on a date. October 17th. 3 years ago. The light from the lantern shook, casting dancing shadows that made the skeleton's jaw seem to chatter. October 17th. 3 years ago. The date burned behind her eyes, a brand of searing ice. The air, thick with the scent of roses, now felt cloying, a suffocating sweetness meant to mask the rot beneath. This wasn't an ancestor. This wasn't a vigil. This was a grave. A tremor started in her knees, a violent, rattling hum that traveled up her spine. Her breath came in shallow, useless little sips. The grand, ancient story Calder had woven around her unraveled with the silent ticking of a dead man's watch. A sad necessity. Calder's voice flowed from the darkness behind her, smooth as poured honey, and she flinched, scrambling back on her heels. The sound of her boots scraping on the stone was a gunshot in the silence. He stepped into the edge of her lantern light, his face a mask of somber regret. He didn't look at her, but at the chained skeleton, his expression one of profound disappointment. He found his way in. Some men are driven by a greed that overrules their reason. He believed the old legend spoke of gold, not guardianship. He was unwilling to leave. Marlowe stared at him, her throat tight, a knot of words caught behind her teeth.
Unwilling?
The rust on the chains was deep, biting into the iron like a cancer. They hadn't been placed there yesterday. You chained him? The question was a raw whisper, barely audible. I offered him the world, Calder said, his gaze finally shifting to her. It was filled with a deep, sorrowful sincerity that made her stomach twist. All he had to do was understand. To see what I was protecting. What we will protect. He refused. He saw only a prison. And so, he made it one for himself. He gestured to the circle of skeletons. They understood. They gave their lives in service to this place. He tried to take from it. There is a difference, Marlowe. A universe of difference. He extended a hand to her. His skin was warm, his grip firm as he helped her to her feet. The lantern felt impossibly heavy. Come. There is no need to dwell on the failures of others. Our story is just beginning. She let him lead her away, her feet numb and clumsy. She could feel the vacant sockets of the skeleton watching her go, a silent, final warning. As they passed through another archway, the scent of roses deepened, but now it was threaded with something else. The dry, mineral smell of old bone and dust. The next chamber was a library. Or a study. Bookshelves carved from the same black stone stretched from the floor to the vaulted ceiling high above, lost in shadow. The spines of the books were not paper or leather, but thin sheets of hammered metal, copper, silver, a dull gray lead etched with symbols she had never seen. A single, enormous desk, a slab of obsidian polished to a mirror sheen, dominated the center of the room. On it sat a decanter of amber liquid and two glasses that seemed to be spun from shadow. The knowledge of ages, Calder said, his voice a low hum that vibrated through the floor. He swept an arm wide, a gesture of offering. Histories of stars that died before your sun was born. The songs that silenced sirens. The true name of every king and the secret shame of every god. He walked to the desk, his movements fluid and certain. All of it, a gift. For you. He poured the liquid into the glasses. It was thick, like sap. To help you acclimate. The air here is old. It can be taxing for a new soul. Marlowe stood just inside the archway, her knuckles white where she gripped the lantern's handle. The image of the watch was seared into her mind.
October 17th. It wasn't a story. It was a fact. A single, hard point of reality in this floating, impossible dream.
She watched him, his back to her, the elegant line of his shoulders, the confidence in his posture. Every word he spoke was a beautiful, silken thread, and she could feel them wrapping around her again, trying to cocoon her, to smother the sharp-edged doubt. Who was he? She asked, her voice stronger than she expected. Calder turned, a glass in his hand, a small, patient smile on his lips. His name is of no consequence. He was a man who lost his way. That is his entire story now. He glided toward her, offering the glass. She didn't take it. Her gaze drifted past him, scanning the towering shelves. The sheer, silent weight of all that knowledge was oppressive. It wasn't a library, it was a mausoleum of thoughts. Something felt wrong. Beyond the obvious, beyond the chained skeleton in the other room. A draft. A tiny, cold thread of air was winding its way around her ankles. In this deep, still place, it felt as impossible as a stray sunbeam. You've had others here, she stated, not a question. You called them key-bearers. I have, he said, his smile never faltering. He set her glass down on a small stone pedestal near the wall. For a time. This place requires a certain strength. A resilience. The solitude, it grinds away at those who are not meant for it. They all chose to leave, in the end. To return to their fleeting, sunlit world.
They all chose to leave.
The words were too smooth, too practiced. Like a line from a play he had performed 100 times. Her eyes followed the source of the draft, tracing a path along the base of a bookshelf. There, near the floor, was a flaw. A crack. In this place of seamless, ageless perfection, a hairline fracture ran up the obsidian wall, hidden in the deep shadow of the shelf space. It was no wider than a single strand of her hair, but it was there. An imperfection. A mistake. Calder stepped closer. He reached out, not to touch her, but to trace the line of a silver-bound book on a low shelf beside her. When I first saw you, in that little cafe, you were reading a book of poetry. You were so lost in it, you spilled your coffee when the barista called your name. You looked up, flustered, your cheeks flushed. And in that moment, I did not just see a woman. I saw the echo of every soul that has ever cherished a quiet moment with a beautiful word. Her breath caught. She remembered that moment. The embarrassment, the heat in her face. It was such a small, meaningless memory. How could he know that? The intimacy of it was a violation and a comfort all at once. He saw her. He truly saw her. The doubt began to recede again, replaced by that intoxicating warmth, the feeling of being utterly, completely known. I have waited for you, Marlowe, he whispered, his voice resonating in her bones.
For so very long.
He turned and walked back toward the desk, his attention drawn to a massive star chart carved into the far wall. Let me show you the paths the comets take through the forgotten void. It's a sight to humble emperors. This was her chance. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Her legs felt stiff, her movements jerky as she knelt, pretending to adjust the strap on her boot. She kept her head down, her hair falling to hide her face, but her eyes were fixed on the crack. The cold air seeped from it, smelling of damp earth and something else. Something like decay. Her fingers, trembling, traced the cold stone. She pushed. Nothing. She slid her hand along the wall, her fingertips searching. Her nail caught on a slight protrusion, a section of the polished stone that wasn't quite flush. She pressed, hard. There was a low grinding sound, like teeth being set on edge. A section of the wall, no larger than a shoebox, receded inwards, revealing a dark cavity. Her breath hitched. Inside, wedged into the tight space, was a small, dark object. She reached in, her fingers closing around it. The texture was wrong. Not stone, but worn, supple leather, cool and slightly damp to the touch. She pulled it free just as Calder turned back to her, his face alight with a teacher's passion. The cartographers of antiquity believed the world was flat, he began, his voice booming with theatrical charm. Imagine their terror if they could see this. With a speed born of pure adrenaline, Marlowe shoved the object into the deep inner pocket of her coat. She stood up, her face a careful blank, her heart a deafening drum in her ears. The object was heavy in her pocket, a cold, square weight against her ribs. She forced herself to look at the star chart, to nod as he spoke of dead nebulas and whispering galaxies, but she heard nothing. She could only feel the sharp corners of the book she had just stolen. He eventually led her to a suite of rooms, explaining that they were hers. They were opulent, carved from the same stone but softened by heavy tapestries depicting swirling, star-filled skies. A bed, heaped with black velvet coverlets, sat in an alcove. A pitcher of water and a single cup rested on a bedside table. It was beautiful. It was a cage. Rest, he said, his voice gentle. Absorb the silence. Let it become a part of you. I will return in a while. He paused at the door, his eyes searching her face. Do not be afraid, Marlowe. This is your home now. You are safe. The moment the heavy stone door slid shut, sealing her in, she ripped the book from her pocket. It was a small journal, its dark leather cover warped by moisture. The pages were stiff, the corners soft with wear. Embossed on the front, in faded gold leaf, were two words, Bryony Cross. A wave of cold washed over her, so intense it made her gasp. She stumbled back and sat on the edge of the bed, the velvet sinking beneath her weight. Her fingers, slick with a sudden sweat, fumbled with the clasp. She opened it. The handwriting inside was a frantic, spidery scrawl, the ink bled and faded in places. It was not a diary of days, but of moments, of escalating terror.
September 4th. His name is Calder. He found me in the rain. He knew my favorite song. He said he'd been waiting for me his whole life. I think I've been waiting for him, too.
Marlowe's blood ran cold. It was the same. The exact same beginning. She flipped a few pages, the stiff paper crackling in the profound silence.
September 19th. He calls this place the stillness. It is beautiful. Like living inside a polished geode. He showed me the library. Books made of metal. He says he wants to share it all with me. He knows things about me. Small things. The name of my dog when I was 7. How I broke my arm falling from the oak tree. He says our souls are connected.
She felt a rising nausea. The same promises. The same tricks. September 28th. The rose scent is everywhere. It's so strong. Sometimes, at night, I think I'm going to drown in it. When I asked where it came from, he just smiled. I haven't seen the sun in weeks. He says the sun is a garish, fleeting thing. He says true beauty is eternal, and eternal things dwell in the dark. Her own lungs felt tight, the air in the room suddenly thick and unbreathable. She turned another page. The handwriting was different now. Shakier. The words crammed together. October 5th. He calls me his key. He says my presence here keeps the heart of this place beating. But I don't feel like a key. I feel like fuel. I'm so tired. All the time. I tried the main door today, when he was in the lower chambers. It won't open. Not for me. October 12th. I found a crack. Behind the bookshelf in the library. A draft. I think this place is not as seamless as he claims. There are whispers in the stone. Not his. Others. Faint. Afraid. Am I going mad? Marlowe's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the book. She turned to the last entry. The ink was smeared, as if written in a frantic, final haste. October 17th. My name is Bryony Cross. He is not a lover, he is a jailer. He drains us. He feeds on us. This place is his prison, and we are the locks that keep him here. Emmett Thorne was the first. The one who built it to contain him. But he corrupted the design. He needs a living soul, a key, to anchor him to the world. Don't believe the romance. Don't believe the whispers. It's all a lie to get you to stay. My watch is a Citizen, Eco-Drive. It will stop when I do. He's coming! If you are reading this, he chose you next. Run. Marlowe slammed the journal shut. The sound was a desecration. October 17th. The watch. The man in the other room wasn't some greedy trespasser. It was a previous victim. Or perhaps, another keybearer. One of the ones who chose to leave. The lie was so vast, so complete, it was suffocating. Every tender word, every shared secret, every promise was a carefully constructed bar in her new cage. She shoved the journal under the velvet coverlets, hiding it deep beneath their weight. She stood up and walked around the room, her arms wrapped tight around herself. The tapestries were no longer beautiful, they were funeral shrouds. The silence was not peaceful, it was the silence of a tomb. She ran a hand along the wall. It was cold, unyielding. Stone. Everywhere. She had to pretend. The thought was a shard of ice in her gut. She had to walk out of this room when he returned and smile. She had to let him speak his beautiful, poisonous words and act as if she were still entranced. If he knew she knew, what would he do? The image of the chained skeletons provided a stark, immediate answer. She forced herself to breathe. In. Out. She thought of Bryony's words.
A jailer. Emmett Thorne. A crack.
There were flaws in this place. There had to be. An escape. She had to find it. Her mind, once filled with wonder, was now a frantic machine, calculating, searching for an exit. She splashed her face with the cool water from the pitcher, the shock of it grounding her. She looked at her reflection in the dark surface of the water. Her eyes were wide, her pupils dilated with terror. She had to hide that. She had to bury the fear so deep he would never see it. When the stone door slid open again, she was standing by the tapestries, her hand resting on a depiction of a dying star as if admiring it. She turned, a slow, deliberate movement, and forced a smile onto her lips. It felt brittle, like a mask of thin glass. Calder stood in the doorway, a silver tray in his hands. On it was a plate of bread, cheese, and dark, glistening fruit. A feast for the prisoner. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He looked pleased. Pleased with her, with his choice. "Thank you," she said, her voice a stranger's. "I was just taking it all in. It's more than I ever imagined." "It is merely the anteroom to what I have to show you," he said, setting the tray down. He came towards her, his presence filling the room, pushing the air from her lungs. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, and it took every ounce of her will not to recoil. His fingers were cold. Not a normal cold, but a deep, profound coldness, like stone that had never known the sun. "You are settling in well," he murmured, his face close to hers. "I can feel the initial shock receding. You are beginning to harmonize with the stone." She held her breath, her smile fixed in place. Inside, she was screaming. Her mind raced, sifting through Bryony's words, looking for a plan.
The library. The crack. Were there others?
He guided her out of the room, his hand resting on the small of her back. The gesture, which hours ago had felt so protective, now felt like the grip of a warden leading her back to her cell. He led her not back towards the library, but down a different corridor, one that sloped gently downwards. "There is one last place I must show you," he said, his voice resonating with a deep, almost religious reverence. "The heart of it all. The place where the music of this place is born." They emerged onto a wide, circular balcony that overlooked an impossible abyss. Below them was not darkness, but a slow, swirling vortex of colors, deep violets, blood reds, and incandescent blues, like a captive galaxy. There was no sound, but she could feel a vibration in the stone beneath her feet, a low, constant hum that resonated in her chest. It was terrifyingly, soul-crushingly beautiful. "This is the engine of eternity," Calder whispered, standing beside her, his arm now around her shoulder.
"This is what we are protecting. A power that could unmake worlds, held in perfect, silent balance. And you, my Marlowe, are the final piece. The living heart that regulates the flow."
She stared into the abyss, feeling a strange pull, a hypnotic allure. It would be so easy to just let go. To fall into that terrible beauty and be done. But Bryony's desperate scrawl flashed in her mind. Run. She had to play her part. I have no words," she breathed, leaning her head against his shoulder. The contact made her skin crawl. She could feel the cold of him seeping into her, a languid, draining chill. She felt weak, tired.
"He drains us."
"You don't need words," he said, his voice thick with triumph. "Only feeling." They stood there for what felt like an eternity, him watching the vortex, her watching her chance for survival dwindle with every passing second. She had to get back to her room. To the journal. There might be more. A map. A clue. "I'm a little overwhelmed," she said, pulling away slightly. "It's so much to accept." He turned to her, his expression softening into one of deep understanding. "Of course. Forgive me. I have had centuries to grow accustomed to it. You have had but a few hours. Go." Rest. We have all the time in the world. The walk back to her chambers was the longest of her life. His eyes were on her back. She could feel them. Every step was measured. Don't run. Don't rush. When the stone door slid shut behind her, she collapsed against it, her body shaking with silent, racking sobs. She was a fool. A blind, romantic fool. She pulled the journal out from under the covers and frantically searched the pages again. There was nothing more about an escape. Just fear. Just the ramblings of a woman losing her mind and her life. But one phrase stuck out. Emmett Thorne was the first. The one who built it to contain him. This wasn't Calder's home. It was his prison. And he had tricked her into becoming its newest warden. And its newest prisoner. She sat on the floor, her back against the bed, the journal in her lap. She had to think. What was her deepest secret? The one thing no one could possibly know?
The silly, childish fear she had never spoken aloud to a single living soul.
Her great aunt's house. The guest room with the floral wallpaper. And on the mantelpiece, the porcelain doll with the single, fine crack running through its left eye. She used to have nightmares that it would climb down at night and stand over her bed.
She had never told anyone. Not her mother, not her friends, not a single diary entry. It was her own private, ridiculous terror.
A soft chime echoed through the stone, and the door slid open. Calder stood there, a tender smile on his face. "I know it is a lot to take in, my love," he said, his voice a balm. He stepped into the room, his presence immediately shrinking the space, stealing the air. He saw her on the floor, the terror she hadn't been able to hide now stark on her face. His smile deepened with sympathy. "You're trembling. There is no need. Nothing can harm you here." He knelt before her, his gaze holding hers, so full of what looked like love it made her want to scream. "This is our home. Our sanctuary. It's as safe as your great aunt's house," he murmured, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper.
"Even that silly porcelain doll with the cracked "I can't hurt you anymore."
A vacuum opened in her chest, sucking the air from her lungs. It wasn't just that he knew. It was the way he said it, the proprietary softness in his voice, as if her most private terror was a charming little trinket he had discovered and now owned. The journal. He hadn't read it. He had absorbed it. Plucked the memory from her mind as easily as picking a flower. Every word she had written, every secret fear committed to the page, had fed him. The sympathy in his eyes was the satiated glaze of a predator that had just feasted on her soul. "How?" The word was a dry rasp, a flake of sound in the oppressive silence. He tilted his head, the picture of gentle confusion. "I told you, Marlowe. We are connected. What is yours is mine. Your fears, your hopes, your strength." He rose to his feet in a single fluid motion, a movement too graceful for a man. He extended a hand to her. "Come. The final lock awaits. Emmett Thorne's work is almost undone." His hand, pale and perfect, hung in the air between them. An invitation to her own damnation. She looked from his hand to his face, the beautifully sculpted features that had so captivated her. She saw the lie now, saw it in the unnerving stillness of his expression, the lack of any true warmth behind the dark gleam of his eyes. He wasn't a prisoner suffering unjustly. He was a thing in a cage, patiently waiting for the zookeeper to make a mistake. She didn't take his hand. Pushing herself up on trembling arms, she stood, the heavy journal still clutched to her chest like a shield. It was useless now, its secrets plundered, but its weight was a comfort. A reminder of the truth she had, for a moment, held in her own hands. "You don't love me," she said. It wasn't a question. It was the tolling of a funeral bell. Calder's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something cold and ancient passed through his eyes. Impatience. "Love is a word for things that are fleeting. What we have is permanence. An anchor in the ceaseless tide of ages. You are the key. You are the harbor. Now, bring the book and come with me. It is time. He turned, not waiting for her compliance, and walked out of the room. He didn't need to force her. The entire house, the very stones, seemed to bend to his will, a gentle but irresistible pressure guiding her forward. Her feet moved without her consent, carrying her out of the bedroom and down the grand staircase, following the echo of his footsteps. The air grew colder with every step downward, the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like old blood, replacing the fragrance of dried roses and beeswax. She clutched the journal tighter, its leather cover slick with the sweat from her palms.
She remembered Bryony's frantic script. He makes the walls listen. He had made the journal listen, too.
They descended into the crypt. The lantern he carried cast long, dancing shadows that writhed like living things. They passed the empty alcoves, the desecrated tombs, until they reached the heart of the labyrinth. A circular chamber, larger than the others, with a high, vaulted ceiling from which a single, colossal chain descended. It was a python of rust-pitted iron, each link as thick as her waist. The chain was tethered to the center of the floor, disappearing into a massive, iron-banded stone dais. Embedded in the very top of the dais was a lock. It was not ornate. It was a brutal thing of black iron, a squat, ugly mechanism built for one purpose: to hold. Calder set the lantern on the floor. Its golden light flickered upwards, illuminating the profound age of the place, the weariness of the stone. Emmett Thorne was a master of his craft, Calder said, his voice reverent, yet laced with contempt. He bound my physical form with iron, but he bound the prison itself to a key of flesh and blood. A bloodline. Yours. He turned to her, and the mask of the tragic romantic was gone. The face was the same, the features as exquisitely carved as ever, but the intent behind them had shifted. The practiced tenderness had evaporated, replaced by a raw, hungry anticipation. It was the look of a starving man before a feast, and she was the main course. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. The journal, he commanded, his voice a low thrum of power. The final incantation. Thorne's own failsafe. The words that will tell the lock you are the willing key-bearer. Her fingers felt like clumsy sausages as she opened the book. She found the page, the ink a faded brown, Thorne's script tight and severe. The words were a language she didn't recognize, yet somehow, she understood their shape, their weight. Read them, Calder urged, his voice now a silken threat. He stepped closer, and the cold radiating from him was no longer a romantic chill but the absolute zero of the grave. She looked from the page to the lock, then to his face. The hunger there was stark, undisguised. This was it. The moment of her undoing. A whimper escaped her lips. Bryony's warning echoed in her memory, a ghostly scream against the oppressive silence.
He lies.
He had lied about everything. His love, his suffering, his promises of eternity. All of it, a meticulously crafted lure. Her gaze fell upon the lantern. Its flame trembled, a tiny, defiant spark of warmth in the suffocating cold. She took a breath, the air burning her lungs. She began to read. The strange, guttural words felt alien on her tongue, scraping her throat raw. As she spoke, a low hum began to emanate from the stone dais, a vibration that traveled up through the soles of her feet and into her bones. The lock glowed with a faint, sickly green light. Calder watched her, his lips parted in a silent snarl of triumph. His eyes were fixed on the lock, his form vibrating with pent-up energy. He was a thundercloud about to break. She finished the last word. The hum intensified to a deafening thrum, and the green light on the lock pulsed violently. An almost imperceptible click echoed in the chamber. The key, Calder hissed, his voice cracking with eagerness. He reached into his coat and produced a long, heavy key of black iron. He didn't hand it to her. He pressed it into her palm, his fingers like bars of ice, closing her own trembling hand around it. Now. Turn it. Set me free, Marlowe. Fulfill your purpose. She stood before the dais, the iron key a dead weight in her hand.
This was the end of the world. Her world, and perhaps everything else. Freeing him would be an extinction-level event, starting with her. But what choice did she have?
To refuse was to remain here, his plaything, his warden and prisoner, until he tired of her and found another way. Her hand moved, slow, robotic. She lifted the key to the lock. The green light seemed to reach for it, to lick at the iron. She could feel Calder's presence behind her, a wave of palpable force, of immense and ancient will pushing her on. He was so close she could feel the stillness of the air around him, the utter absence of breath. She slid the key into the lock. It fit with a greasy, metallic sigh. Her fingers tightened on the bow of the key. She looked at Calder's reflection, distorted in the polished iron of a chain link. The handsome face was gone. In its place was a taut, monstrous visage of pure need, the skin stretched thin over sharp bones, the eyes burning like coals in the depths of a furnace. The glamour was fraying under the strain of his anticipation. She turned the key. The sound was not a click. It was a cataclysm. A deafening crack of thunder that was both sound and force, a shockwave that threw her backwards off her feet. The green light exploded, and in that blinding flash, the illusion of Calder Vex shattered completely. The thing that stood before her was tall and emaciated, its limbs too long, its joints bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over a frame that was barely human. There was no hair, no lips, only a slit of a mouth that opened into a black maw. And the eyes, they were voids, pits of absolute darkness that drank the lantern light and promised nothing but oblivion. For a heartbeat, it was frozen, stunned by its own freedom. That was all the time she had. Scrambling backwards on the stone floor, her mind screaming, she did the only thing she could think to do. She kicked out with her foot, not at him, but at the lantern. The glass housing shattered against the dais. Oil sloshed across the stone and the base of the chain, and the flame leaped. A whoosh of incandescent orange fire erupted, a sudden, blinding wall of light and heat between her and the monster. The creature shrieked, a sound of tearing metal and splitting stone, a noise that clawed at her ears and tried to unmake her mind. It recoiled from the sudden blaze, its void-like eyes unaccustomed to such raw light. Plunged into a disorienting chaos of roaring flame and writhing shadows, Marlowe scrambled away into the darkness. Behind her, the great chain began to fall. It wasn't a simple drop. It was the death of a god. Link by massive iron link crashed against the stone floor, each impact shaking the crypt to its foundations. The sound was the breaking of mountains, the splintering of continents. Dust and chips of stone rained down from the ceiling. She crawled on hands and knees, blind, deafened, guided only by the memory of the path. The monstrous shrieks of the thing behind her were mixed with the apocalyptic percussion of the falling chain. The air was thick with ancient dust and the acrid smoke of burning oil. She felt the stone floor beneath her palms, slick with damp, and pushed herself forward, gasping for air that wasn't there. Her hand hit a wall. She felt her way along it, her breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. She found the archway and stumbled through it, then the next. The roar of the fire and the crash of the chain began to recede, replaced by the thundering of her own blood in her ears. She ran. Up the winding stone stairs, her legs burning, her lungs on fire. She didn't look back. She knew, with a certainty that was colder than the crypt air, that if she looked back, she would see those void-like eyes in the darkness, and she would die. She burst through the door at the top of the stairs and into the manor's kitchen, slamming the heavy oak door behind her. There was a thick iron bolt. With fumbling, shaking hands, she shot it home. It ceded with a heavy, final thud. She leaned against the door, her body racked with tremors, and slid down to the cold flagstone floor. Silence. The silence of the house was absolute. The apocalyptic noise from the crypt was completely sealed away, as if it had happened in another world. The manor was still, waiting. She sat there for a long time, listening to the frantic beat of her own heart slow to a painful, heavy rhythm. He was free. Down there, in the dark. And she was up here. The house was no longer his prison. It was hers. A fortress, with a monster in the basement. Slowly, shakily, she got to her feet. She walked through the silent house, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous spaces. The beautiful tapestries, the gleaming furniture, the priceless art, it all looked like a stage set after the play had ended. Hollow. Meaningless. She reached the grand foyer and walked to the massive front doors. She ran her hand over the intricate carving of the wood. She could open it. She could walk out, into the sunlight, and run. But where would she go? He was free. The world was no longer safe. Emmett Thorne had not built a prison for a man, he had built a cage for a plague. And she, Marlowe Yael, last of her line, had just unlocked the cage. Her hand fell away from the door. She turned and looked back into the silent, shadowed expanse of the manor. She was not a prisoner anymore. She was a warden. The last warden. A faint scratching sound echoed from deep within the house. The sound of something testing its new cage. She did not flinch. She stood her ground, in the center of the hall, a lone sentinel in the encroaching dark. The air still carried the faint, subterranean scent of damp earth and ozone. And on her palm, she could almost feel the phantom weight of a cold iron key.